I mentioned my grandfather was a lover of nature. Now, I had an advantage with my grandfather. I was his favorite. It was easy to be his favorite grandchild because I was the only boy. I have about 15 girl cousins and one girl sister. So that's why it was easy to be his favorite. He would take me on some of his nature trips. And this is what kind of told you what kind of a person he was. The house that he spent most of his life in, Nicollet, after selling the store with the apartment above it, he had the yard full of bird houses and bird feeders, and one special thing. Now, the house was an older house, pre-World War II type, that had the big front porches on. The porch was as wide as a house, and maybe 10 or 12 feet deep, I suppose. Three-sided with windows and screens for summer. He used it differently than any of the other porches in town. First of all, he let the brush or the shrubs outside grow tall and cover the windows. Most of those places were designed that you could sit inside with all and enjoy the world outside through all of the windows. That was not his plan. He grew shrubs and bushes taller than the windows. And then he put birdhouses and bird feeders within these shrubs. So I can, as a little kid, remember him taking me into the porch from inside the house and showing me all of the nests through the windows. Now, the birds were, of course, used to seeing him, and we would go up and he'd point through the window screens in the summer, and we'd see a nest, and he'd say, "Those are robin eggs. They'll see how blue they are." And he says, "They're so-and-so or weeks old. They should hatch in about a week or so. We'll keep an eye on those." And the whole three sides of his front porch was like, I guess you'd call it an arboretum today. He kept it just for his bird friends. And one more bird story about him. I had an aunt that I did a story about once, my Aunt Carol, who was his daughter. And one of Carol's traits was she was the best gift giver in the world. She bought me a Christmas present every year and birthday present, and so forth. And she bought her father a Christmas present every year. And they were always very special. She bought him his first TV. He wasn't interested in TV, had never had a TV. But she bought him a TV and antenna and the whole works one Christmas. Well, also one Christmas, she showed up for Christmas with a canary bird for him, a little yellow bird. She came with a cage and a stand for it and all the bird seed, everything you need to get into having a bird pet. For many years, however long canary birds last, that bird and my grandfather were the best of friends. At night, he would take the canary and put it in the cage and then put a blanket of some sort over it, and that's where the little bird would stay. And in the morning, he'd take the blanket off, let the bird loose, and the bird walked around the house and sat on his shoulder most of the day. As he walked around the house, read the papers, whatever he was doing, there would be the little bird on his shoulder. He named the bird Dickie. I never asked him why or where the name came from, but that was little Dickie. And it was a pretty hard day for him when little Dickie passed away. Of course, birds don't live very long. And, but it was just typical of what my grandfather's love of wildlife was, having a little bird on his shoulder. The gun I mentioned was passed on to me. Now I passed it on to another son. It still has only been shot 8 times, and those were over 100 years ago to chase those wild dogs away. Pretty rare gun that we have in the family. On the subject of my grandfather's nature trips, and I said how he favored me, like he would take me on his little tour every so often in the summertime to check his bird nests. He did something else. What we'd do is do this in the evening if I was going to stay overnight or weekend or something like that. We would do this in the evening. He'd say, it's time to go watch the deer. And I'd say, okay. And we'd go out and get in his car. Now, the story about his car, the car at that time was a 1939 Chevy business coupe. I know that because in his whole life he only had 3 cars. And the reason he only had 3 cars was he just didn't drive very much. First of all, he never drove in the wintertime. I know that because I would go along and help my dad, and we would go and put his cars up on blocks for the winter and then take it down again in the spring. He wouldn't drive in the winter, he wouldn't drive in the rain, and he wouldn't drive after dark. That really narrows down the time you spend in your car. That's why he only had 3 cars in his life. He just didn't wear them out. When he passed away, they auctioned off a lot of his stuff, including that 39 Chevy, and I tried to buy it, but sadly to say at the time, I didn't have enough money. It got a good price because it was just like new. Anyhow, what we would do in that Chevy, we'd leave town on a highway, turn off onto a lesser road, a gravel road, take that for a while, and then he knew this field road. Turned off the gravel road onto this field road, and we'd head for what looked like a woods, but it was actually part of Swan Lake. I think it was called Middle Lake, if I'm not mistaken. We'd drive up to the wooded area, and there would be an opening wide enough for a car to go down, a little trail down, and we'd stop at the top of the opening in this woods, and he'd take the car as far as he could so that it was tilted downward, and then he'd shut it off, take his foot off the brake, and we'd coast down this incline through the woods. And as we went through the woods, the deer would be coming out. We could watch them on both sides of us. Sometimes they were on the trail and they'd walk right by us. And as a little kid, I was amazed. I could look out my window on the passenger side and there'd be a deer walking alongside of us, and the deer would turn and look at me, not a bit afraid. I guess Grandpa was out there enough times that they were used to seeing him. And Grandpa knew the right time to go. I don't know what it was, 7 or 8 o'clock at night, just before dark. And the deer would come out of the woods and go down to the lake. We'd coast down to the lake, shut the engine off, and just sit there and watch the deer walk into the water up to their halfway up their legs or so, and sit there and fill their bellies with water. Hundreds of deer. And then when they got done, they'd turn around and go back up in the woods. And at that point, Grandpa would start the car up, we'd go back up our trail and leave again.